So, for today's talk, the first talk which I gave yesterday afternoon was concerning the third and fourth of the five hindrances. And so today's talk will be focused on the first and the second of the five hindrances. And the reason why I've chosen to talk about these five hindrances to begin with is because when we understand them, then we know how to get past them. And once they disappear and vanish, then the path to deep meditation and to insight becomes very clear. These are the hindrances to wisdom and also to stillness. And once again, already that I have emphasized that samadhi, the eighth factor of the Eightfold Path, usually called Samma Samadhi, is concerning jhanas. And to translate that into English as concentration, I never found that an accurate or helpful translation of the word samadhi. I much preferred the translation of stillness, because that stillness, once it's experienced, allows the mind to become very, very powerful. So in order to experience such stillness, all the things which agitate your mind have to be let go of to the point they disappear. And one of those things is the wanting, the first of the five hindrances. Now we all know that the word for wanting in Pali is kama-chanda, and the word kama specifically means the world of the five senses. It's all that wanting, that aspiration, that thing wanting it to happen, which is concerned with the five senses and the five sense world. That's why it was called kama-chanda. But hopefully you also know that the first hindrance is also described by another Pali phrase, which is loke abhijja. And I was quite surprised to find out that that word loke abhijja, which is mentioned as a prerequisite before you practice the satipatthana, it's a vinaya loke abhijja domanasang. And as a Westerner, not brought up in a Buddhist country like Sri Lanka, I did have the opportunity to learn Pali, and also the way I learned Pali was on the advice of a Professor A.K. Warder of Cambridge University, and he always said one of the best ways to learn Pali is to read the suttas and find out how these words are used. It's the same way as you would learn any foreign language or language you're not used to. And you see how it's used again and again and again. And that makes it very clear what the meaning is. And especially just reading through the Anguttara Nikaya in Pali for the first time, I noticed those words, loke abhijja, would come up again and again and again and again as the Pali word referring to the first of the five hindrances. In English we use the word a synonym, an alternative word for the same thing. And I was also then kind of surprised when you read the commentaries to both of the Satipatthana suttas, the one in the Digha and the one in the Majjhima. And there too, it mentioned, when we talk about loke abhijja, that refers to the first hindrance. And domanassa, which is I found in two suttas, is a synonym for vyapada. In other words, that even in the Satipatthana, when it says vinaya, which is the best English translation, is having restrained, having weakened, lessened those first two hindrances. And then it said in there also that when we have the first two of a very common, well-mentioned group, such as the first two hindrances, the others of that group are also to be understood as included. In other words, it said that that phrase particularly means having weakened, disciplined, restrained the five hindrances, then one is capable of practicing the Satipatthana. And this was important to me because I remember as a student, one of the first books which I took out from the library of the Cambridge University Buddhist Society was one of the first early translations of the Satipatthana Sutta by two Sinhalese monks. And when I read that, the two Sinhalese monks had commented that the Buddha had claimed that anyone who practices the four Satipatthanas can, even within 7 days, get some amazing results of being a non-returner or even full arahat. And these two monks, very honest, very good monks, said they'd been practicing the Satipatthana course in Burma for more than 7 days. They did 2 10-day courses, and they said they still were not an arahat, still were not a non-returner, still weren't even stream winners. They were honest about that, which is commendable. But then when I thought, why? Because I had such confidence and faith in the Buddha's teachings. Why? What was the Buddha saying? That you can get fully enlightened or a non-returner in just 7 days if you practice these 4 Satipatthanas. And these two monks, diligent, honest, of good virtue, had tried that and it hadn't worked. What were they doing wrong? And the thing which I would say they weren't doing correct was that preparation, that foundation, that prerequisite of having abandoned or at least weakened the 5 hindrances first of all. And I stand by that interpretation today. If we are going to practice the meditation or Satipatthana, one of the most important things is to weaken those 5 hindrances. And one of those 5 hindrances which you find that people often forget to weaken is wanting. I mentioned this to one monk earlier, that there are many very devout Sri Lankan Buddhists, even in Perth, Australia, who come to my temple, go on my retreats. There's many of you here who are living in Sri Lanka, I regard as good friends. But so many of them say that why they are practicing is because they want to become a sowan. And I think that that is your biggest problem. Wanting. Aspirations are very noble, but you don't reach those aspirations through wanting them. I know that sometimes people also criticize me because they say, well, tanha means craving. But it does not just mean craving, it means wanting. It's a far less intense than craving. My understanding of the word craving in English means a very strong wanting for something. This is just even ordinary wanting will disturb one's practice of meditation and will distort the truth which you think you are seeing in your meditative practice. Even small wantings tend to make your mind see what it wants to see, even though it's not really there, distorting the truth just to please your desires. And so that's one of the reasons why wanting is one of the biggest of the hindrances, why I would suggest it was put first amongst all those hindrances. Why the Buddha would say in the Second Noble Truth is that wanting is a cause for suffering, big time. So a little story to lighten things up. In the Thai monastery, Wat Pa Pong, many years ago, there was a young novice, a samanera. I'm not quite sure exactly what age he was, maybe 9, 10, 11, around that age. Just like in Sri Lanka, that many children who haven't got a good home to go to, children who it's difficult for the parents to bring up, sometimes that they can go and stay in Buddhist monasteries and be looked after, have a good education, learn some Dhamma, and maybe grow into wonderful beings later on in their life. And you may all know that in the Thai tradition, it's much easier that if you do not like being a monk, you can also always disrobe. And if you do disrobe, you still, what you have done, the renunciation you have done over those years, is appreciated and valued. But anyway, this young novice monk was listening to one of the talks from Ajahn Chah one evening. Remember, I was with Ajahn Chah for about 8 or 9 years. I know my great teacher very well. But you may read some of his books translated into English. But when you heard him speak in Thai, or more often in the Laotian dialect called the Isan language, which I was also fluent in, that sometimes he could give extremely boring talks, which lasted for hours. Now you're very lucky here that I am only allowed to give a talk for 1 hour. Sometimes my talks can be very boring. You've heard it before. And if you've heard some of these stories before, please remember this. I've heard my stories more than anybody else. Every time I say them, I hear them. But one thing which I also realize and have been confirmed by the people listening, every time you hear one of these stories, you can often see a deeper aspect of it. It's not as if I'm just saying what you already know. By retelling the story, you can look at it, contemplate it, and take it much deeper. Just like all the Buddha's stories which you have heard, which he also repeated many, 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 many times. So this particular story of the novice monk listening to one of Ajahn Chah's teachings in the evening in the main hall. It was a boring talk, and it went on hour after hour after hour. And it was not possible for him to sneak out and go back to his room. You are all very lucky here, especially those of you sitting next to a door. You can leave very easily. But nevertheless, this poor novice was listening to this talk, more and more boring. And then he started thinking, when is Ajahn Chah going to stop? When you have one thought like that, for this novice, it kept on repeating itself over and over and over. When is he going to stop? When is he going to stop? When is he going to stop? This was just a young novice who was in the monastery because he had to be there. He had nowhere else to go. It wasn't like many of you who volunteered, wanted to become bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, and you are really inspired to become bhikkhus and bhikkhunis. This little novice, he was there because he had to, nowhere else, no choice. So he kept on thinking, when is Ajahn Chah going to stop? When is he going to stop? When is he going to stop? And then, repeating that so many times, he had what we call like an insight. He put it round the other way. Instead of saying to himself, when am I going to stop? When is Ajahn Chah going to stop? He said, when am I going to stop? He just said that once to himself, just one thought. And then the novice stopped. When he opened his eyes, it was already the morning time. He'd been sitting there for many, many hours. Not unconscious, just beautifully, as we say in the West, blissed out. He just had his first experience of a jhana. We know it was a jhana because at the end, when Ajahn Chah did actually stop, that the monks would sort of bow and do some chanting and pack up their things and turn off the lights and go back to their kutis. He hadn't heard a thing. And it was past dawn now. The monks had gone out for their alms round. He knew because he missed the alms round, he wouldn't be able to have his one meal of the day. He'd have to go hungry that day. But if any of you have ever got into a jhana for the first time, you don't mind about being hungry. You're so satisfied with the joy and the peace and the bliss inside. And that was this little novice. He got his first experience of a deep samadhi just by saying to himself and understanding its meaning, why don't I stop? Why don't you stop? Because he'd been bored for such a long time, when he did suggest stopping, he really did stop. What did he stop? He stopped his wanting. He didn't want anything in the whole world. With the wanting, also, which stopped next, was what we use to gain our wanting. The thoughts, the plans. Those also stopped. And when he wasn't thinking, wasn't planning, wasn't judging, he just stopped. That is the reason why his mind would go into these deep, deep meditations. He didn't go via the breath. He went through something even more powerful. That right thought, or right lack of thought, called not wanting. And that's why, to this day, that when people go to Western countries, anywhere in sort of United States or Australia or UK, some people complain to me, there's many Buddhists in United States, but you don't see any sign of their existence. There aren't many Buddhist temples. You see so many Christian crosses all over the place. Even here in Sri Lanka, see many crosses here. But fortunately here in Sri Lanka, we also see at the crossroads these little Buddha statues sitting there at most of the junctions. And we do see many signs of Buddhism here in this country. But in Australia, I say, every time you go in a city, driving a car, you see signs of the Buddhist teaching at nearly every crossroad. Every time you see a stop sign, I say that is teaching you about something really important about the Dhamma. Stop your wanting. Stop doing things. Then your mindfulness will get stronger. And you may even be lucky enough to stop so much that your mind just stays there. And the mindfulness gets, again, stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger. I did mention, I don't think I did mention, I'm getting old as a monk now. This year will be my 49th was. And so that's a long time being a monk. And I mentioned to people over in places like Australia, if you've been in one profession for such a long time, many people think of retirement. And they say, what is retirement? Why do people think of retirement? Because they have the illusion that once you don't have a company to serve, once you don't have to go to the office and do some sort of service for others, then you have nothing to do and you can really relax. But I think many of you, especially in the back there, our lay community, upasakas and upasikas, or those of you who are monks and nuns, you may know many, many friends. They don't have a job to do anymore at work. But do they relax? No, they find so many other jobs to do. Volunteer for the Ajahn Brahmavanso Society or volunteer for something else. And they're sometimes more busy than they were before. But at least here you can learn just how to stop. How to stop. Can I stop being Ajahn Brahm? And the answer is yes. This is one thing which I've practiced. Maybe those of you who have busy lifestyles can remember this. As my Study Viharika friend, Venerable Pasadika at the back there, would actually remind me, knows his story, that I was working overly hard. I had a city centre to run, to teach bhikkhunis, to give their training to, many other centres to look after, city centres, branch monasteries. And I noticed that I was working 7 days a week. Even when I went overseas, many of my followers in person said, have a nice holiday in Sri Lanka. Holiday? I still have to work really hard. But what I did, I made a resolution that every Monday morning, when I go back to Bodhinyana Monastery, that I would have a morning pretending I was a visitor to Bodhinyana, not an abbot, not a senior monk, not a boss, but just a visitor. Because many people would visit the monastery in which I live, and they would say how peaceful it is, how beautiful it is. When I was walking with them, I said, peaceful? This is where I work. Beautiful? This is where I have to tell the other monks and lay people, you've got to clean this up, you've got to sort of prune that bush. To me it was so much work. And I could not appreciate it as visitors could. So when I decided that only just one morning a week I would pretend and really get into it of being a visitor rather than a boss, I started to see what my visitors saw. Bodhinyana Monastery in Western Australia was beautiful. It was peaceful. When someone would come up and ask me, said, one of your monks needs some help. I'm only a visitor today, I can't help them. If they said the pipes were broken, not my problem, I'm only visiting. Look, if any of you are visiting somebody else's monastery, or visiting here in Bandarawela, those of you who are not organising this retreat, if something goes wrong, is it your problem? Ah, I'm only a visitor. As a visitor, you can appreciate the peace and the beauty much better than if you're an owner. In your meditation, if you own your meditation, and you come up to me and said, my meditation is like this and my meditation is like that, sometimes I tell you, what are you talking about? It's not your meditation. You don't own it. It's the meditation practice which I experience. How about trying to be a visitor rather than an owner? If you're a visitor, you have nothing to do. You can't control it. You just observe it. And I will tell you this, that your meditation will look far more beautiful if you don't own it and control it. Like the monastery in which I live looks far more beautiful when I'm not the abbot. There's something important to understand there. Because once you control things, you have duties and responsibilities. And from those duties and responsibilities, out comes wanting. I want my monastery, because that's my job, to be more beautiful, to be comfortable, to be more helpful for all those who come to visit, to have more huts so more people can come and practice there. But when I want it, then I have to do it. For those of you who ever get to run a monastery, you can try this management technique, which I found very, very helpful. Many times a monk would come up and say, I think we should change this or do that, or build this. And it would be a very good idea. So I said, yes, wonderful, it's a good idea. Your idea, you have to do it. And when a person has to take responsibility, rather than just give me the ideas and I have to organise it, but they have to do it, it's amazing how few suggestions I get from the monks. So, a lot of times, when we stop wanting, we have much more peace. That's one of the reasons I said at the beginning, all of you who want to be so one, if you want it, you're creating the obstacle to the first hindrance. Even wanting something wonderful, something good, is a hindrance. Because instead of being here, you have an idea of somewhere else you want to be. You want. One of the opposites of wanting, this is from the explanation of the Four Noble Truths. This is in the basic Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. It is one of the opposites to wanting is called vimutti, freedom. What is freedom? Some years ago, I used to spend a lot of time teaching in prisons in Australia. One of the reasons I liked teaching in prisons is because the prisoners you met were always very honest. Everything had been taken away from them, and their sense of ego was very, very low. When I teach ordinary people like yourselves, sometimes there's still a lot of that sense of ego and pride left, and you're not as honest as people in jail. That's my personal experience. But anyway, that when I got quite busy doing other duties, I gave that job to other monks to do, to teach in the prisons of Western Australia. And then when one of these monks was teaching in a high security jail, the prisoners there got to like him as a good friend, someone they could trust, someone who wasn't critical about them. And so they asked him to stay on a little bit longer. They'd arranged some tea for him. So he stayed. And then one of the questions they wanted to ask was, what is it like in a Buddhist monastery in Australia? How do you live? And when the monk sort of began by saying, in Bodhinyana monastery, we have to get up at 4 a.m. And that shocked the prisoners. Even when people are in this prison for murder, they don't have to get up to 6 o'clock in the morning. What have you done to have to get up so early? And then he went through the routine, which you all practice as well. And the prisoners were shocked. In prison, you have 3 meals a day, 4 or 5 if you can get some snacks. You get a huge, not arms round where people put food in your bowl what they think you like, but they have a choice every day, whatever food you want to eat. And the prisoners can watch TV. Can you watch TV? No, that's against our rules. And the prisoners can play sport. Can we play sport? No, we don't play sport. And the prisoners were really surprised at just how austere a Buddhist monk's life is compared to being in prison. Now I think the prisons in Sri Lanka are much more austere, but prisons in Australia can be very, very comfortable. And when they heard how a life in a Buddhist monastery is compared to being in a prison, one of those prisoners forgot where he was and said to this monk they liked very much, "That's terrible in your monastery. Why don't you come in here and stay with us instead?" And it made everybody laugh, but there was some truth in that. Life in a prison in Australia is much more comfortable than life in a forest monastery. But then I started thinking, contemplating, why is it there is and there continues to be a waiting list of people who want to come into Bodhinyana monastery? And many good monks, very good monks, don't have the opportunity to come and stay long term in Bodhinyana monastery. And why is there a waiting list of people who want to leave jail? What's the difference? It became very obvious that the reason why people want to leave jail is because they don't want to be there. The people who actually are in Bodhinyana monastery who don't want to leave, it's simply because they want to be there. They're content being there. And that made it very clear that any place you don't want to be is called a prison. If you are happy being here in this retreat place in Bandarawela, if you're happy to be here, you will feel free. If you don't want to be here, then this place is like a prison for you. If you are a monk or a nun, and you're happy to be a monk or a nun, you will feel free. If you don't want to be a monk or a nun, these robes are like a prison garb for you. In many states in the United States, that the prisoners have to wear orange, just like you nuns. If you were walking through a city in the United States, you may be picked up by the police. They think you're a prisoner on the run. Anyway, the dark brown robes are not usually prison uniform. Phew. But nevertheless, it's one of the reasons why, if in your meditation, if you are content, satisfied to be here, with whatever state of meditation you're experiencing, you may have sore knees, you may have a sore back, you may be tired, you may have sloth and torpor. If you're happy to be here, you feel a great sense of freedom. And that freedom is an important contributor of your meditation deepening. Do you want to be here, or do you want to be somewhere else? If you're a putuchana, do you really want to be a stream winner? You're blocking the path. I just want to be here. Contentment. Easily satisfied. You know, we do have a brief version of the Karaniya-matta Sutta. No, actually it's a full version of the Karaniya-matta Sutta. Well, it's not Karaniya. The Karaniya-matta Sutta. In English, we've translated it. And part of those verses is, this is what should be done by one who's skilled in goodness. ... May you be contented and easily satisfied, not proud or demanding in nature. And those lines there, and in good, accurate English translation in the Metta Sutta, may you not be proud, but easily content. May you be easily content, not proud and not demanding in nature, easily satisfied. If you follow that advice, it does make it easy to meditate. You're not demanding of what your mind will do. You're watching it, at peace with it, not wanting anything in the whole world. You stay with that, you're contented, easily satisfied. You're stopping. Why don't I stop? Then you find the mind gets very peaceful and very still, all by itself. Then yesterday at the interview, I mentioned this similar. I think I even mentioned it last night as well as a response to a question, why the leaves move on a tree. It's because the wind blows. That's got a similar metaphor in why does water have waves and ripples on the surface. It's an old, I think it's Japanese or could be Korean simile, of the best way at looking at the full moon is as a reflection in a mountain lake. If you do have the opportunities to be in a mountainous area and go up to that lake in the evening when it's a full moon, and if there's no wind, then that lake becomes perfectly still and acts like a mirror. And you see this perfectly accurate, not distorted reflection of the moon and the stars in the sky above. And that simile has many wonderful meanings. First of all, when it's still, it can reflect the Dhamma. From stillness, you can see things as they truly are. If that lake has ripples or waves on the surface, whatever you see is distorted reality. And it's also the simile of the full moon at night reflected in the still forest pool. That is just such a beautiful description of like nimittas, which I'll talk about in a talk later on. But right now, to get that lake to be perfectly still, all one needs is to let go of wanting. All that force which distorts and creates the waves and ripples in your mind. And some people think, well, look, if I don't want, or don't aspire to be a stream, then I'll never get there. The opposite is more true. Another simile for you. This is one of my similes. The simile of the donkey and the carrot. I see some of you smiling because you know this story. It's a beautiful story. Donkeys were often used in Asia to pull carts carrying people or goods. But donkeys can be some of the most stubborn animals in planet Earth. Even in English, they have the phrase to be as stubborn as a donkey. If you take a stick and beat that donkey, the donkey still won't move. It's the wrong use of a stick. Instead, the wise owner of the donkey ties the stick to the donkey's neck. So the front of the stick is 2 foot in front of the donkey's head. And on the end of that stick, the farmer ties a string. On the end of the string, the farmer ties a carrot. I'm not quite sure what you would tie on the end of the string in Sri Lanka. Maybe a hopper or a mango. What do Sri Lankan donkeys like? But this is a European donkey. You tie a carrot on the end. I know when I told this story in Malaysia, in Penang, they said, no, you must tie a durian on the end of the string, because they love durians. But so you tie a carrot on the end of the stick, and the donkey sees that carrot, can smell the carrot, and so starts moving towards that carrot out of wanting. But no matter how fast that donkey runs after the carrot, you can see, you can smell it, it's just so close to you. But every time the donkey moves, so does the stick, so does the string, so does the carrot. And that carrot's always about 2 foot in front of the donkey's mouth. And that's how the owner of the donkey gets it to pull whatever's behind it. But ever since Buddhism came to Europe, they cannot use that method any longer. The donkeys discovered how to catch carrots really easy because of the Dhamma. So what the donkey does, the donkey is walking after that carrot, walks very fast and starts running after that carrot. Doesn't matter how fast that donkey runs. That carrot is still about 2 foot in front of the donkey's mouth. But then the donkey does something which only Buddhists know how to do. The donkey stops. And once the donkey stops, the momentum of the carrot pushes the carrot further away from the donkey than it's ever been before. Goes about 4 foot as it swings up, 4 foot in front of the donkey's mouth. But the donkey has also got this great wisdom to know that things don't happen immediately. You have to have patience. It's one of the things which the Buddha actually taught. Learn how to just wait. So the donkey doesn't do anything, it just stands there, it's stopped, and then the carrot starts swinging towards the donkey. It's the first time that's ever happened. You've been striving and wanting and putting a lot of effort into learning how to meditate and getting to nimittas and jhanas. You tried so hard, now you stop. No wanting. and you experience your meditation gets what you think is worse. It's not as peaceful as it used to be. It's not as close. It goes further and further away. But you're patient. And then you find the carrot starts coming towards you. You're not doing anything. But the mind is finding it easier to focus on whatever the meditation object is. And then soon that carrot is at its normal position in front of your mouth. 2 foot. But this time, that carrot is coming at tremendous speed towards your mouth. You're not doing anything. And all these beautiful things you read about and you aspire to in the past, they all start happening. They see the delightful breath, and watching the breath, it looks gorgeous. You see the hold of the breath. You see the piti sukha start to grow. You see the nimittas come up. And they're easy, and it's gorgeous, and it's powerful. You don't do anything. You're just being totally still. And not doing anything, not wanting anything. And the last moment, before that you can enter that jhana, before the carrot can come into your mouth, is remember the importance of kindfulness. You know how I have described loving kindness, the unconditional loving kindness, when you say the door of my heart is open to you no matter what you ever do. The donkey has to remember that Dharma as well. The donkey has to look at that carrot coming up to its mouth and say to that carrot, "Carrot, the door of my mouth is open to you. Come in." Have you ever seen how big teeth the donkeys have? If it doesn't open its mouth, the carrot just pops off the teeth and just has to start the practice all over again. Now that's not such a joke. That's serious. When you start to experience this meditation stages actually happening, you see nimittas. They become still, they become beautiful. And then just the last thing you have to do is almost like you're saying to yourself, "Mind, the door of my heart is open. Come in." Because too many people get close to these jhanas, but then they overreact. A bit too much for me. No, I don't know if I can handle this. You really have to stop. Stop all controlling, all wanting, and let it happen. You don't do the jhanas. You let them occur. And I've said this many times, so I'm not afraid of saying this anymore, that when I teach like this, many times, and the first time I said this was here in Sri Lanka, in a forest monastery down south, where one of the monks at question time, they asked the question, there was only monks there, so they asked the question, "Ajahn Brahm, you talk so much about jhanas. Ajahn Brahm, how are you at jhanas? Can you enter jhanas, Ajahn Brahm?" Now you know that is a question you have to be very careful of. If you say an answer and it's wrong, that can be a parachika. If you say an answer and it's right, and there's lay people listening, then that's a pajitya offense. And I respect my Vinaya rules very much. So when they asked me that question, I made this answer. It's kind of using a loophole. I studied the Vinaya, so I know it very well. And I said the answer is that Ajahn Brahm cannot enter jhana. Ajahn Brahm cannot enter jhana. Now, do you want to leave and get your money back? And then many people who knew me realized this wasn't just an answer which was to be taken on face value. But it was a very lovely Dhamma expression as well. I say Ajahn Brahm cannot enter jhanas. Ajahn Brahm has to disappear first. My sense of self and all the ownership and control and wanting which comes with that sense of personal identity has to vanish. And then the jhanas happen. These are not your attainments, not your achievements. It's not something which you do. It's something which happens when you stop doing things, when you stop owning, when you stop identifying that this is your possessions, your achievements. Again, have a look at the Anatalakkhana Sutta, where the Buddha kept on saying, all these 5 khandhas, you don't own them. You'd love to say, oh, may my consciousnesses be like this. May my sankharas, my perceptions, my vedana, my body be like this. But it can't be done, because your 5 khandhas do not belong to you. They're not yours. Not me, not mine, not a self. So what have you been doing all this time? Trying to make these deep meditations happen. Trying to control them and make them occur. When the Buddha said that cannot be done. You just let this ownership and the control and the wanting which comes from all of this disappear. If you're not there, who's there to do the wanting? Many years ago, I saw that things like attachments were so difficult to understand and to let go of. Obviously, as a layperson, I was a young man when I ordained. I ordained at 23 years of age. So before then, you were so interested in the opposite gender, in beautiful women. I know this even in Thailand. This is an old joke, but I think you may appreciate it. That when you went into the forest, that many monks were afraid of tigers. And of course, Ajahn Chah told me there's no record of a tiger ever killing a monk. And I said there wouldn't be, would there? The monk wouldn't be alive to tell, and the tiger wouldn't report it. How do you know? And anyway, it wasn't tigers which the monks had to most fear. Tigers hardly ever ate a monk, if they did at all. It was Thai girls. I know many monks who got eaten by Thai girls and no longer monks. but nevertheless, that if you want to experience what those jhanas are, you do have to stop controlling, to let go. These aren't yours. It's just what happens when you start to disappear and vanish. When you let go enough, why don't I stop, said the novice. The novice did stop, like he wasn't there, perfectly mindful, but no sense of ownership or a sense of self. You let go of that for a little while, and it gives the opportunity for jhanas to arise. You let go of that, and then you realize this myth of ownership and control can disappear very, very easily. I give many, many talks at my age as a monk. I remember one of the first time I gave a very big talk, which was over in Singapore. I think it was over 3 nights. 3,000, I think, came the first night, 4,000 the second night, 5,000 people came the third night. This is only 150 here. This is a small audience. But imagine you're speaking to about 5,000, about 3,000 or 4,000 people. That's a lot of people. And this was in Suntec City Convention Centre in the middle of Singapore. And as I walked in that hall, I knew that these were people who were working all day, long hours, as they do in Singapore, who come in the evening to get a quick bite to eat dinner and were coming to spend a couple of hours listening to me. And I thought, two things. What if I give a very bad talk? So bad that they turn off Buddhism for the rest of their lives. I would not be fulfilling my duties of being a monk and trying to keep Buddhism flourishing in our world, as each one of you have a duty to do, each in your own ways. But even more worrying to me at the time as I was walking in, what happens if I give a really good talk? If I give a really good talk, the danger of a sense of ego and self, being proud, I am a great teacher, I was more scared of that than giving a bad talk, and becoming proud. So because of that, I was walking in, what should I do? And then I realized, a great lovely insight, I never give a talk. Everything which comes out of my mouth is being conditioned, been caused by all the great monks and nuns I've met in my life, especially my own teacher Ajahn Chah. I'm not saying I'm channeling Ajahn Chah, just all the things which I heard from him, all the ways of teaching which I learnt, all the inspiration I got from so many other monks and nuns, including many great Sri Lankan monks. All of those, that was what was giving the talk, not me. And when I realized I was just this vehicle, just in this great path, continual path of over 2,500 years of Buddha Dhamma teaching, I was only teaching what I'd learnt from others. Not Ajahn Brahm. That fellow never really existed. Just all the teachers I'd listened to and learned, all the practice they'd inspired me to do. That was what was giving the talk. And that does stop you feeling proud. I know that many of you, when I'm walking now, you go to the path and you pull your hands up. That's just our tradition. It's nothing to do with me. And that's also one of the reasons why I try to keep my sense of humour, even though many of you think it's inappropriate. I do that to try and remember who I truly am, a nobody. And one of the experiences which I have was going to conferences. I love conferences where people can ask you tough questions. I apologized last night. You asked some very good questions, and most still were in the box. It's because I respect questions. I will try and answer them the best I can. I may not understand them totally, but I will try to do the very best I can based on what I've been taught and what I've learnt. But I remember going to this conference over in Vietnam, in Hanoi. It's one of the interesting things about being a senior monk now. You get invited to so many conferences. Most of them you can't go to. But this conference, one of the things which I like there, for once I get to listen to other people talk. And now wherever I go, I'm the one in front of the microphone. So listening to other people was a wonderful thing to be able to do. So in Vietnam, I was sitting in the back of the room, listening to somebody else give a talk, and then this Vietnamese monk came and sat next to me. And then he sat next to me because he wanted to practice his English. And there's not that many people in Vietnam at the time, you can actually talk to. So he saw like a white monk. So he sat next to me and said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "I am from Australia." And he said, "Oh, Australia." And he said, "In Australia, there's this famous monk called Ajahn Brahm. Do you know him?" I said, "Yeah, I know him." "Really? What's he like?" just like me. I am Ajahn Brahma. And I'm not exaggerating. He went, ah! Because he didn't show me respect. And I said, no, don't worry. I did this on purpose. It's nice to be able to sit in the back of a room and act like an ordinary monk and see what other monks get up to. So anyway, that's how you teach. That's how you meditate. You don't want anything. You're just content and easily satisfied. Then you get peace. Sitting here, very peaceful. And that peace gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And then you're watching your breath, you're always breathing. So you're watching your breath and it's peaceful. You don't want it to get more peaceful. You don't want anything. It just stays with you. Because your breath is like a best friend. I don't want anything out of it. Each one of you, which I've known for a long time, I don't want anything out of you. If you come and have breakfast with me, you usually get given more than you ever give back to me. I love that, sharing whatever I have with each one of you. So, this is where we don't want anything. And that means you become really peaceful. And that peace will become so full of joy and happiness. When you want something, there's this tension inside of you. How am I going to get this? How soon? You don't want anything in the whole world. Then you've retired. You want for nothing. Usually that's a term in English for very, very wealthy, powerful people. They want for nothing. In other words, no wanting. So who are the wealthiest people in Sri Lanka? It's the enlightened monks and nuns. They don't want for anything anymore. Even multimillionaires or billionaires, they still want something. It's not how much you have, but how much you want makes you poor or makes you wealthy. So the wealthiest people are those monks and nuns who don't want anything in the whole world, perfectly content, and sit here for hours having lots and lots and lots of fun. So that is the little talk today on the absence of wanting and how it makes you feel free, even if you're in a jail. And it makes you learn how to be totally at peace and bliss out, get these jhanas, and realize these jhanas did not come from wanting. They came from you disappearing. The teaching of anatta becomes so obvious, you can't miss it. Okay, I've gone over time. Please forgive me. So hopefully that was useful for you. And please forgive me for making you translate so much. It's really hard work translating. So I got a great admiration for you. Thank you. Okay. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. I realise I tried yesterday, but it doesn't work. It's not in Sri Lankan culture yet. Go sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. The Malaysians and Singaporeans, the Australians love that. They really just go sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And they go away with a big smile after the talk. Anyway, I tried my best.